Today I have a fun menu in store. I am sharing 4 scratch-made fast food copycat recipes. The McRib is back, and it is always back with this recipe. So here I am just chopping up some pork chops into about 1-inch pieces. It doesn't really matter the size, just small enough so you can put it in a food processor. And I'm putting it in my food processor and adding in about a tablespoon of sugar and 3 tablespoons of water and a little bit of salt really to taste. And then I am processing it until it turns into a ground meat consistency. Now, before I forget, I do want to let you know that this recipe and all of the recipes on today's video are in the description box below. These are not my recipes. I found these online and I am testing them, so I will leave links to those blogs in the description box. One of the things that I think we like about fast food is we know what we're getting. It's always the same size and it's the same flavor. And a McRib is always about 4 ounces. But one of the best parts of homemade food is that it has some variations and it isn't always quite so precise. So I am shaping these to fit some homemade sourdough buns that I made the day before. Now I made these in these rectangular patties and put them on parchment paper, and then I slid the parchment paper onto a baking sheet. I would recommend just putting the parchment paper on the baking sheet and then putting the patties on it just to save yourself the trouble. And then I'm putting another piece of parchment paper on top and freezing it for a few hours until they are solid. Now a McRib is simply just a pork patty in barbecue sauce. So you could totally use store-bought barbecue sauce if you want to, but here I am making a homemade copycat barbecue sauce. This is simply 3/4 cup of ketchup, 2 tablespoons of molasses, a tablespoon of Worcestershire, a tablespoon of brown sugar, a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar, some salt, onion powder, garlic powder, cumin, chili powder. It calls for coriander, but I did not have any. Normally, I would eyeball the ingredients for something like a barbecue sauce, but because I'm trying to make this taste actually like a McRib, I did measure the ingredients, but I always encourage you just to eyeball the ingredients if that is your thing. Once the edges of the pot start to get bubbly and it comes to a light boil, I dropped the heat to a simmer and I let it simmer for about 15 minutes. And now that the patties are frozen solid, I am cooking them. Now, I was skeptical about cooking frozen patties like this, but it actually worked really well. And what I like about it is you can totally make a bunch of these in advance and freeze them and cook them from frozen. And I think you could even freeze the sauce so you could have McRib freezer meals really easily. As I mentioned, for the bun, I am using some homemade sourdough buns that I made the day before. The sourdough bun recipe is on my blog and on YouTube. I will leave links for those in the description box, but it is a really light and fluffy bun, probably the lightest and fluffiest homemade bun I have ever had. So it works great for something like a McRib. The trick to keeping it really light and fluffy and delicious, though, is to toast it with a little bit of butter. If you don't have homemade buns, or if that is not your thing, don't even worry about it. You can get any bun or bread that you prefer. Once the pork patties are done, I'm just simply putting them in the sauce until they are really nicely coated and putting it right onto that toasted bun. And of course, a McRib has to have pickles and onions. The pickle and onion to meat ratio in a McRib is pretty specific, and my patties were a little thicker, so I had to add more pickles and onions to really get that McRib flavor. But this was really good, and it was very close to an actual McRib. I'll definitely be making these again. Now, let's talk about Chick-fil-A. I am no stranger to Chick-fil-A at all. In fact, I just went to Chick-fil-A the other day to get my kids some chicken nuggets because we were short on time. I love Chick-fil-A. It's delicious, but I wanted to see if we can make a real Chick-fil-A sandwich at home. Word on the street is that Chick-fil-A brines their chicken in a pickle juice. I have read that is not true, but I decided to try it just because that's what everyone says. And I will say, like every time I have tried brining chicken in pickle juice, I don't taste any pickle. So first and foremost, I would skip the pickle juice brine and just use a regular old salt brine. The breading in a Chick-fil-A sandwich has 2 ingredients that are important: powdered sugar and MSG. I did add powdered sugar, but I did not add MSG in this recipe. For the breading then, I used 1 cup of flour, 3 tablespoons of powdered sugar, a half a teaspoon of paprika, salt and pepper to taste, about a half a teaspoon of chili powder, and a half a teaspoon of baking powder. The brine chicken is then dredged through an egg and milk mixture and then through flour and then double dipped in that again. So right back into the egg and then back into the flour before it is fried in hot oil. If I am not mistaken, I think Chick-fil-A fries their food in peanut oil, which makes really delicious food, by the way, but I don't have peanut oil. So I used avocado oil. And here is one thing that went wrong that you should keep in mind if you make this. The powdered sugar burns easily. So I almost always fry my chicken at 375 because when you put it in there, the temperature drops to about 350. But 350 seemed to be too hot for that. So it did burn a little bit. So what I did is once it was brown on the outside, I transferred it to a baking stone and finished cooking it at 400 degrees in the oven because the breading was burning, but the inside of the chicken was still pretty cool. I live in the South. I married a Southern man who was raised by a very Southern mama. So we have fried a lot of chicken. And that's the first time I've ever burned the chicken. So I'm pretty sure it was the powdered sugar. And then here we are back with a buttery toasted sourdough bun. And I am putting the chicken patty right on there with, of course, some pickles because the number one with extra pickles is life. And this was very good. Now, I don't think it tasted quite like Chick-fil-A because it does not have that MSG in it. But I will say, the breading texture was exactly like a Chick-fil-A sandwich. And also, as a side note, if you wanted to make extra of those, you can reheat them in an air fryer and they crisp up really nicely. Okay, next up on the homemade fast food menu is a polarizing one, a Wendy's Frosty and fries combo. I think a Frosty and fries is one of the most delicious things on earth. My husband hates it, so you may or may not love this one. But here I am freezing some chocolate milk in little silicone containers. If I were to do this again, I would just make homemade chocolate milk. I had family in town and I was cutting a few corners. That was not the best chocolate milk. So if you do these, I recommend just making chocolate milk and freezing it. Now, this is a couple days later and my husband makes really great French fries in the air fryer. So he is chopping up some potatoes and then is tossing them in some avocado oil and cooking them in the air fryer. Of course, deep fried French fries are delicious, but the air fryer makes some really good French fries and it's a little bit healthier and it is so much easier than frying them. He fries them at 400 degrees for about 40 minutes or until they are crispy. And while we are waiting for them to finish up around the last 10 minutes or so of cooking the fries, I am making the Frosty. So I am not measuring this precisely just because the chocolate milk wasn't great and I felt like I had to supplement some of the ingredients. So I threw in some of the frozen chocolate milk cubes into my blender and I'm adding in some heavy cream and a few spoonfuls of condensed milk and some vanilla. That is homemade bourbon vanilla. If you haven't made homemade vanilla, you are missing out. It's really easy. You just put some vanilla beans and some bourbon or vodka, let it sit for a few months, and you have homemade vanilla. But once all those ingredients are in the blender, I am just, of course, blending it up. And then I am taste testing it as I go, and it definitely needed more chocolate flavor. So I added a little bit more chocolate, and then I think I went back and added a little bit more condensed milk to sweeten it up. But I will say, even though that wasn't the best chocolate milk I've ever had, this definitely had some pretty major hints of a Wendy's Frosty. Of course, one of the important parts here is that sweet and salty combo of the Frosty and the fries. So make sure you salt the fries and maybe even salt them a little bit on the heavier side. And I really like dipping my fries in my Frosty, and I thought this was really good because it actually did taste like a Frosty and these fries are delicious. My husband does not like dipping fries in a Frosty, but he does like eating them individually, and he also really enjoyed both of these. This was really easy to make, so if you are having a late night fast food craving that's also a throwback to maybe some younger years, this is the go-to. Last up on the scratch-made drive-thru menu is a sausage, egg, and cheese McGriddle. So I am starting this by making the pancakes. But the thing about a McGriddle, it's not really a pancake because a pancake would fall apart. It wouldn't be able to hold the sausage, egg, and cheese. So it's some cross between a pancake and a bread. And it's a little bit tricky to make. For the pancakes, the recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of flour, 2/3 cup of milk, about 3 tablespoons of melted melted butter, 1 egg, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. And that maple syrup is pretty critical for the McGriddle, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You can see that this batter is really thick, and I think it needs to be this thick so the pancakes can, of course, be thick and have that consistency. But also, I ran out of all-purpose flour and I did not realize it when I was filming this, so I had to use bread flour. So bread flour absorbs more moisture, so that might be one reason why it was so thick. But either way, it needs to be a thick pancake batter. However, it's really hard to cook evenly and to make into those perfect little round circles like a McGriddle is, because it is so thick. So what I found is if you drop about 2 tablespoons of that thick batter in there, let it cook for like 30 seconds on one side, flip it over, and then smush it down. That helps create the shape and the thickness needed for the sandwich. Mine were pretty imperfect, but by the time I did my last batch, I figured out what I needed to do. And the rest is pretty simple. You just fry up some sausage patties and scramble some eggs and cook it like an omelet. And that's the thing about fast food. It can't be that complicated because they can't make it in mass and sell it in mass if it's super complicated. So the nice thing about these copycat recipes, like the McGriddle, for example, is that it's not hard, but there are a lot of moving parts. There's pancakes and sausage and eggs that you have to make, which none of it is really that hard. But honestly, sometimes in the mornings, I just don't feel like doing all of that stuff. So the one trick about cooking eggs for something like this, or really any time, is to cook them pretty low and slow. That helps them stay nice and fluffy. And as they cook, I like to rotate the skillet around just to let any uncooked egg roll to the side so it can cook too. And then I just folded this up, and this ended up being a lot more egg than what I wanted on my McGriddle. This was actually just 2 eggs. So I put about 1/4 of this on my sandwich. And then I assembled it with a slice of melted American cheese. And even though the pancakes didn't turn out aesthetically the way I would have liked them, this tasted a lot like a McDonald's McGriddle and was very good. Of these recipes, the one I think I liked the best was the McRib. It tasted just like a McDonald's McRib, but they were all very good. Remember, if you want to try these recipes, the links for them are in the description box. And if you want to stay in the know of all the Moon and Magnolia happenings, be sure to sign up for the email list. I will send you links to all of my recipes, posts, tutorials, and videos directly to your inbox. The link to sign up is in the description box. Thanks so much for stopping by today at the Moon and Magnolia drive-thru, and I will see you again next time.